Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Tales of TIC Podcast. Today I'm joined by Nick Wainwright. So Nick has been working in the TIC space for basically all of his career, and he's actually spent the last 8 years leading the E&E business in Eurofins. He's the national business line leader. Welcome to the podcast, Nick.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me.
No worries at all. Just to get things started, as we usually do, if you could just give us a bit of background into your career and how you got into the TIC industry originally.
Okay. Well, as a child, I'd always had an interest in how things worked, and ultimately, after I did O and A levels, I went to university in Newcastle to study electronic engineering, and as part of that, you had to have an industrial sponsor, and I was very fortunate to have GEC Plessey in the Northeast as my industrial sponsor. And the idea was that you went to work for them in the summer. It was a 4-year course, and in the third year, the summer of the third year, I went to work in the acoustics department, which I found sort of really interesting. And at that point, they had a very small, what was called an RFI business, radio frequency interference business. And I sort of got involved in that a little bit, and I found that sort of really, really quite interesting. And then when it came to the fourth year and after graduation, then you generally went to work for your industrial sponsor. So I was asked where I wanted to work, and I said, I fancy doing some acoustics and some more RFI. And they said, that's really good, because we've got a really big problem at the moment with some new telephones that we're designing, and they're picking up police, taxi firms, and everything, and there's a real big problem there. So they'd really, they'd really appreciate some additional help. So I thought, okay, I'll go and see how I can help. And so I went there, and I stayed there for roughly the next sort of 2 years. So I guess the answer to how did I get into the TIC industry, probably a little bit by accident, actually. It proved to be a very good decision.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I think most people's careers follow a similar path. I didn't grow up dreaming of being a recruitment consultant, and just happened to stumble across it. So interesting. But I know that you originally associated with the University of York. Then, how did you become part of Eurofins?
After I left GEC Plessey, which I think that was about the end of 1990, I came to York, and at that time there was a small unit called UK Electronic Centre, and it was part of the Department of Electronics, and it did two things. It did contract electronics design for local businesses generally, but it had also started to do some EMC measurements, sort of very simple EMC measurements at the time, some EMC training, and there was a kind of plan at that time to grow that into ultimately a separate business, because this was the day before any EMC directives. The EMC directive was on the horizon, and lots of the other European directives were on the horizon. But they weren't even published at that stage. So I came to York, and I did some EMC measurements, and thought that's really interesting. And that business grew, and then obviously the EMC directive arrived. We were focused on EMC at that time, and we moved to a new lab at Castleford and set a new lab up with sort of state-of-the-art equipment at that time. And that business continued to grow. So I was a test engineer at that time, and then I became a lab manager, and ultimately a director of what became York EMC Services. Mm-hmm. So we acquired a lab in Scotland from Marconi Electronics in 2000, and then we bought another lab in Bristol in 2007. So we started to have a sort of bigger geographical coverage. across the UK for EMC. And then I became managing director in, I think it was about 2012 or 2013 there. And really, at that time, the University of York owned the business. So it was a spin-out business, as was very fashionable back in the sort of mid 90s. Universities, it was very fashionable to have spin-out companies, and York had a number of those, and it was quite good at setting them up, but it wasn't really very good at knowing what to do with them afterwards. So by the time it came to 2014, 2015, we'd been spinning out for 20 years, and that's not really how it's intended to be. And I wanted to invest in to do more acquisitions and be kind of more ambitious, but the university wasn't really up for that because its main business is teaching and learning. So they said to me, well, okay, we don't know how to sell businesses, so you go away, do some research, and kind of find your next home, really. So who you would want to acquire your PMC services, and somebody who would effectively look after the business, because to their credit, the university didn't just want to sell the business to anybody. It wanted to sell the business to an organization that wanted to invest in it and grow it. So we talked to a few people, and at that time Eurofins actually made contact with the university. And I got a call one day from the finance director of the university, who was actually on the board of the company. And he said, what do you know about Eurofins? And I said, I've never heard of Eurofins. I know absolutely nothing about Eurofins. Who are Eurofins? And he said, well, they've just rung up, wanted to know if we'd be willing to sell York EMC services. So I Googled Eurofins, and at that time it was about sort of like a £4 billion international TIC company. And the first question I asked myself was, I've been in this business for a long time. How come I didn't know about Eurofins? And and then it sort of transpired that Eurofins was very big in food and water testing, a lot of sample testing, biopharma, agroscience. But for its consumer products testing, and particularly the electronics, its part was pretty small at that time, even globally, and it didn't have any presence in the UK on the E&E side. So that was why I'd never heard of it. But that was kind of another. I suppose that was the bit that piqued my interest, because I thought, well, okay, they want to invest in the UK. York EMC Services was clearly going to be the anchor. They were very interested in acquiring more businesses, the same businesses that I'd sort of aspired to acquire kind of myself. So to cut a long story short, we joined Eurofins, I think it was the 1st of July 2017, and immediately started to acquire other businesses. So we acquired 2 businesses in 2018, another one in 2019, another one in 2021, and another one in 2023. So Eurofins has gone from like 0 E&E business in 2017 to being one of the bigger players in the TIC business in E&E in the UK. So that's really how we got involved in Eurofins. I guess timing is everything in business, and the opportunity arose, and Eurofins had decided to make the strategic decision to enter the E&E space in the UK. So that's how we became Eurofins York, and now Eurofins E&E UK.
Yeah, it's exciting. Very exciting transition into quite a large business, one of the biggest in this space. I know we've touched on it in the past before as well, and there's lots of changes going on right now in the industry, but obviously you've been working in this space a hell of a lot longer than I have. What are the biggest changes you've seen across the TIC industry during your career?
I think it depends which space you you look in, really. I mean, lots of different changes. I mean, obviously, when York EMC services first started in 1995, we were doing sort of EMC. We were doing EMC testing, and the testing then and the testing even before that was really quite simplistic in terms of compared to what we have now.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the requirements for anechoic chambers, not many people had anechoic chambers back then. People were using open area test sites for radiated emissions, for some of the radiated immunity tests inside chambers. People were using screened rooms with bits of absorber around. The actual standards were a lot, should I say, a lot looser technically than they are now. So the tests have certainly come on a long way. As products have developed, then the frequencies that we test up to, have increased, as well as the frequencies in use and the threat frequencies have got higher. Mm-hmm. So when I first started doing radiated immunity testing, we tested up to 500 megahertz. The reason we tested to 500 megahertz was because there were no threats frequencies above 500 megahertz, and that was before mobile phone, widespread mobile phone use. Now we're routinely testing to 6 gigahertz and often above. Mm-hmm. So that's an example of how the tests have changed. The products have changed as well. Products have changed dramatically. Most products these days, many products these days have got some form of wireless interface. They didn't back then, and that brings in a whole new level of complexity in terms of the tests. So you've got the EMC tests, you've got the safety tests, but now you've got the tests associated with the wireless interface. Mm-hmm. Of course, once you start to get into the world of IoT and connectivity, then you then get into the issues of cybersecurity, mm-hmm. which come along with that, and there's a lot of focus on cybersecurity now, whereas not too long ago it wasn't really something that was kind of actively considered. I guess standards-wise, the standards have kind of followed the tests. So we have a lot more standards these days, a lot more product-specific standards there, which is generally a good thing. And I think probably at the industry level, there's been a lot of consolidation, mm-hmm. in the same way that Eurofins has consolidated the industry. The other big players have done that as well. So if you go back to in the mid-90s, there were quite a few EMC labs around the country, lots of independent labs, and gradually over the years those have been bought by larger groups. So there are still probably around about the same number of actual labs and locations, but there are a lot less owners. Okay. So there are more groups. So I think that there's definitely been lots of changes there, right from the products through to how the industry organizes itself, through to what we actually do to the products to allow the manufacturer to put the CE marking on, or whatever marking that they're going to put on the products.
That's fantastic. Well, yeah, just wanted to touch upon another question then. I mean, what part of your role do you enjoy the most? I know you kind of started from a test engineer and now up into leadership, so seeing the whole cycle. What's kind of the thing that you enjoy the most?
I suppose sometimes people say, well, kind of ask me, how can you work for the same organization for such a long time? And okay, the company was bought, but essentially, the business is the same. And my answer to that is always, well, I haven't quite done every job in the business, but I've done a lot of them. So I started as an engineer, as a test engineer. I like I like the testing, but obviously as you move up in the business, then you tend to do less technical things, and unfortunately these days, I'm more likely to be looking at a spreadsheet of financial results rather than a spreadsheet of antenna factors. But that's just the way that the way that it goes. I would say that one of the things that I enjoy and have enjoyed, particularly being part of Eurofins, is the M&A activity. So the business acquisition. That's really interesting, because although we bought a lot of businesses, I had a kind of like a master plan. So it's a bit like a jigsaw. You say, well, what do we already do? And where do we do it? What do we need more of? What do we need to do differently? Where do we need to do it differently? So you build up a kind of jigsaw and say, okay, we need another EMC lab on the south coast. Okay, so we bought the Hersley EMC business in Southampton. We want to extend our safety scope. So we bought a Nemco franchise lab in London in 2021. We wanted a calibration business, so we bought ETC in 2018. We wanted to get into the explosive atmospheres testing and certification business, so we bought CML in 2019, and we wanted to extend our EMC capability in the military space, so we bought AQL in 2023. So the bit that I like is that kind of strategy piece where you say, okay, well, this is what we want, this is where we are, this is where we'd like to be, and then kind of putting the pieces in the jigsaw. And I think the whole business about the M&A activity, I think is really interesting. I think one of the things that you learn is that actually buying the business is the easy part. Actually getting to integrate with the rest of the business is the more challenging part, and the part that takes more time. But that's really interesting as well, because you have to get to know the people there. And in the main, the businesses that we bought have been relatively small businesses, and often started by the owner, and still owned by the person who started it. Often they wanted to retire, so you're trying to match a small independent business with a big corporate business, and and that's one of the things that I find quite fascinating as well as challenging, is you've got sort of very different kind of levels, and you've got to bridge that. So it's all about people, and it's all about bringing the people with you, and that transition. So that's for me, that's really interesting, and I've kind of really enjoyed that. I suppose overall I like creating things. So we started other business lines like the global market access. We've done medical device certification. So I like building teams and creating things that build something bigger. So that's what gives me a kind of a buzz, particularly when they're successful as well, because everybody likes success.
Sure. Super interesting answer there. I guess another question I've actually discussed this with previous guests before is that kind of fear. Is there still enough attraction for young people coming out of university to go into this space? So I guess, what would you say to a young person thinking about a career in the TIC industry?
That's an interesting question. I mean, for me, I would say go for it, because for a couple of reasons. I've always found it really interesting, even back in the days of being a test engineer, in that you see, particularly if you're in a commercial, an independent commercial lab, you see lots of new products. You see a massive variety of products. So in our EMC labs, for example, we can be testing a railway signalling system one day, a medical device system Another day, we could be testing a piece of IoT equipment, all sorts of things. So the variety of products that you see is really interesting. And you see some products that are obviously not on the market yet. So sometimes you see some really like innovative products, and you're seeing them almost before anybody else. And that was one of the things that I always found really interesting. And I remember probably the late 1990s, I think it was, we were doing a lot of work for a manufacturer that made set-top boxes, Sky set-top boxes. And at the time, they were the old analog set-top boxes. I suspect you might be a bit young to remember the analog ones. And then suddenly the customer brought in Sky Digital Box. And this was really different because you could pause live TV and it had the menu, the menu that we're all used to, the programming guide. And that was the first time that anybody had seen that. And I remember the kind of buzz in the lab. How do you pause live TV? How is that? How is that possible? Because at that time, we'd never had that, and I remember that to this day. And so I would say to somebody thinking about the TIC industry, you will see a wide range of products, and it's really interesting. So no two days are really the same. And probably the second thing I'd say is that even after all this time, a significant number of products that come into the lab fail some test.
Yeah.
Probably more than half still. And typical customer doesn't really know what to do. So you tell him the product's failed. He's in the lab with you. Engineer says, "Oh, we've got failure here." Typical customer doesn't know what to do. And the way that we've always run the business is to actually help the customer, help the customer find a solution because of exactly that thing. If you say, "Sorry, your product's failed, go away and come back when it's fixed," they don't know what to do. They haven't got any equipment to test, even if they find that what they think might be a solution. So often those solutions are found in the lab, and it's the engineers that are working with the customer that often find the solution, obviously working with the customer. So I think the other area where test engineers get a real buzz is, the customer is never expecting their product to fail. The customer comes in, the product is going to sail through the test, no problem. Obviously, when it does fail, it's a bit of a catastrophe. They need an instant solution. And if as an engineer, you can provide that solution, to them, you're a hero. And a lot of the engineers that we have, are able to make those changes, and they get a really positive feel out of that. So they're not just testing the products, often they're helping to find solutions. So I would encourage, and I do encourage people to join the TIC industry because, mainly because of those two things, but also with, products change on a regular basis, and no 2 days are the same.
Yeah, that was super interesting. I didn't realize how consulting the engineering job is, as well as kind of fixing problems, but also creating solutions.
It certainly can. It certainly can be. I mean, not all labs work in that way, but certainly that's the way that we have always worked. And I think it helps to build. As I said, the engineer is a hero to the customer, and in terms of building customer loyalty, that's probably one of the best things that you can do, is to provide them with a solution to a problem that they weren't expecting.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. Well, I know there's a lot of changes going on politically right now, as well as technology, that are definitely going to have a knock-on effect to this industry. What do you see the TIC industry looking like in the next 5 years, and how's it going to change?
I think that's a really interesting question, and if I had a crystal ball, I'd be that'd be really interesting. I think as an industry there will be more consolidation. Okay? There's a lot of consolidation happened. I think there'll be more consolidation, because I think the key for customers now is to be able to offer compliance testing.
Yeah.
Or not so compliance, to be able to offer compliance. And EMC testing is one part of compliance. You might have some certification, you might have some safety testing. You might have all sorts of other things. And I think it's more about providing, and I don't particularly like this phrase, but the one-stop shop. So working with an organization, building an organization that can provide everything that you need. And I still think there's a lot of education required in the industry. As you said at the beginning, I've been working in the industry for a long time, and some of the questions that we get asked from customers about compliance are the same now as they were back in 1995.
Mm-hmm.
Does CE plus CE equal CE? No, not necessarily. So it's about compliance. So often customers will ring up and say, "I need some EMC testing." I say, "Well, yes, we can provide some EMC testing, but is that all? Is that all you need? What about safety? Where are you selling the product?" And that's where the overall sense of compliance comes in, because ultimately the customer, he wants to place the product on the market in a particular country or a number of countries and meet all of the requirements to do that. So I think the industry has already moved towards that. I think there's some more to go there. I think the industry will have to react to the new products. Obviously, it's already reacted to the proliferation of wireless. There's cyber security, which is high on the radar of most businesses now. And in the future, there's the impact of artificial intelligence, and kind of how will we deal with that as a TIC business?
Mm-hmm.
So customers coming to us that have AI in their products, will there be AI standards to test against or certify against? How will that work? And I think also from our industry, how will we use AI?
Yeah.
I think in Eurofins as a whole, not particularly my area, because that tends to be a bit more bespoke. But I know in the sampling business, whether they're sampling food, they're sampling water, sampling textiles, that type of thing. There's a lot of effort going into automation using AI, because obviously if you can increase the rate of throughput of samples, then that increases the efficiency. And I think how customers use AI as well. We had an incident recently where a customer had used ChatGPT to define his compliance strategy, which was a first. I'm sure it won't be the last. I have to say it was only partially correct. So we have to make sure, as with we all use AI, that there is a human checking the output. But I think it's still an exciting time to join the TIC industry, and I think AI is going to be one of the major shapers of the industry, I think, over the next few years.
No, that's super interesting. I guess then another thing, we speak with leaders and kind of have guys on this podcast, and it seems everyone has a slightly different management style in the way they lead their business. So it'd be interesting to know what is your management style and how that is kind of received in general.
Right. How it's perceived in general, you probably have to ask the staff. You probably have to ask the staff about that.
We're going to follow up with those guys on.
That's an interesting question. That's probably a tricky one to answer. I remember my first job in GC Plessy, and my boss at the time, who I would say was a kind of very good boss, said to me, "People you either manage by respect or by fear." And I've never forgotten that. That was one of the. He said that it was one of the first days of me actually going to work there, and that stuck with me kind of ever since. And I think I've always aspired to lead by respect. Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, depending upon the individual issue that you're dealing with, then do you have a standard management style? I always think that you have to, your management style for the particular thing that you're dealing with has to reflect kind of what's needed. So, sometimes you have to, have a harder management style if you're dealing with, financial issues or something like that. If we're talking about integration of newly acquired businesses, then your management style has to focus much more on the soft skills side. Yeah. Because you're wanting to. It's a real culture change for the business that you're bringing into Eurofins. So I would say I don't have a standard. I would say the standard leadership style is probably one of respect and to try and build the team and get the best out of the team. Mm-hmm. But on a day-to-day basis, you kind of vary that. I guess on the scale of respect to fear, you kind of move up and down a little bit depending upon the issue that you're dealing with.
Yeah, no, for sure, and I think
I don't know whether that's the right answer or not.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting question because we recently had a guy in to give us a full day and understanding people's different personality profiles as well, and kind of changing your leadership style depending on the person and how well they receive certain things. So yeah, no, it's an interesting output.
I think that's it, because probably the most interesting aspect of that, as I said, was the mergers, the M&A, mergers and acquisitions. Because when you bought a business and you go there for the first time, people initially, the first question that people ask is, have I still got a job? That's the first thing that that even if they don't ask, that that's what they want to know. Mm-hmm. Now I can say, hand on heart, whenever we bought businesses, we've always retained the people and that's what I say to people is, we bought the business because it's successful and it's successful because of the people. So there's no benefit for me coming in and getting rid of half the people because that has no benefit. So that's you really have to play on your soft skills side. So you have to allay those fears, get people on side, and then get people to work with you because it's quite a cultural difference.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And then finally, just to go on, obviously running quite a large scale business for a fast paced organization, how do you relax and kind of get away from the stress of the corporate world?
Probably very bad. I'm very badly actually. I'm probably not a good example. A good example of that. So out of work, the thing I like to do most probably on a Friday evening is go to the gym and sit in the steam room for about half an hour and let the cares of the week kind of slowly melt away. I guess outside of work, sort of hobby wise, I'm quite involved with the IEEE, so the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers, both in the UK and at the regional level, so the European and North Africa level. And I do some website design and some publicity and communications work for them, which is kind of more on the creative side. So I think I probably have a kind of an artistic and creative streak in me somewhere that doesn't get exercised during the normal Monday to Friday. So I do that, and I quite enjoy that, because that involves sort of travel to some nice places, and it's something that's different as well.
Yeah.
Sometimes people say, well, isn't that work? But not really, because it's something that I do because I want to do it.
Yeah.
And it's something that's a bit different, and it's something that I get a lot of satisfaction out of. But yes, it is. When you are in a fast-paced business, and you're working for a very ambitious organisation, you do find that the days can become quite long, particularly in a global organisation, because we have colleagues in our business line, from in China. We have colleagues from our business line in California. So pretty much the whole of every time zone that there is. So I'm just fortunate working for a European company that the global meetings tend to be at lunchtime, so we're not at either end of the either end. It's not 5 o'clock in the morning in California, and it's not 9 o'clock at night in China.
Yeah, no, that works well. Well, it's been a pleasure having you on, Nick. Really exciting.
Okay, well, thank you very much for inviting me.
No worries.
And I've enjoyed it.
No worries. Well, thank you very much.